Today I'm going to show how I set up PyCharm for development of iocage. As you know, iocage needs root to run to do most of what it does, but we want to run PyCharm as a normal user and have it run Python and the debugger as root. It's a really nice way to do things, gives you the full graphical environment for not only coding but also for debugging, setting breakpoints, and from testing from the command line. So one way to do this is just to set up a little VM on your machine, and I'll do that now. I'm still on FreeBSD 10.3, but it works fine. Since we're working with iocage, we're working with ZFS, we need more memory than 256 megs. I got 8 gigs on this laptop. 4 is enough for basic stuff. You can't be testing multiple jails running heavy-duty stuff here, but this is more than enough for simple debugging. I'll give it 2 cores. I'm just going to call it PyCharm VM. We need system source code installed to be able to compile and run iocage from source. And to keep things lightweight, I'm just going to use UFS on the main disk. There's no point in putting ZFS, putting the root on ZFS here. It's too much overhead for this little machine, and we don't need it. We'll be adding another disk later, which will serve as our tank for installing iocage and all of our jails. I'm just using NAT in the VM. We can SSH into it from the local host and at the same time not expose it to the rest of our network. And I'm not working with IP6, so I don't even bother setting this up. Let's turn these on and that off. You might want that one on. Let's add our development user here and add this user to wheel so that we can sudo later on. I like the good old C shell. Nice strong password. That's it. Let's reboot to the new installed OS. I don't want to work out of the VM console, so let's log on and find out what IP address it got so we can just SSH in for the rest of this. Okay. Yeah. This is left over from a previous attempt at running through this. Try again. Good. We're done with this guy now. First, let's patch FreeBSD. And install the patches. And reboot. Now let's install a few basic packages that are nice to have. We need sudo so we can sudo. It's going to be used later for debugging as root in PyCharm. Xauth so that we can SSH in with X forwarding turned on. Xclock so we can test that. And open VM tools to make the VM run smoother. Okay, first let's let the users in the wheel group run sudo. And allow X forwarding through SSH. And finally activate the VM tools. I haven't tried this with VirtualBox, but for VMware, Fusion or Workstation or ESX, then this is what you want to put in your rc.conf to make the VM tools active. And I don't want to type this in, I'm going to copy it from the guide. Just a couple steps left. Let's make it boot faster. And finally, we need to set up UTF-8. If you don't do this, you'll run into problems running the PyTest suite. Oops. And finally, make those changes effective. Now at this point I make a custom kernel because I want to work with vimage jails with independent network stacks. And for that to work, we need to have that compiled into the kernel. So let's check the guide. Just call it vimage and put this in it. All I'm doing is enabling the vimage option. Other options that are specified in the documentation for iocage say that these are needed, but from what I can tell, this has been fixed already, and these are only needed if you're using hosts with FreeBSD 10.2 or older. Older than 10.2. So that's enough there. Let's build the kernel and install it. Now we install the kernel. And the last thing we need to do to have this machine ready to go is enable ZFS and add another hard drive. where our jails tank will live. We'll SSH in with X forwarding so that we're ready for working with PyCharm later. Let's create the pool for iocage. Might as well do that now. I don't like to mount the pool to keep things clean, so that's why I do that. And we just use the entire second disk. Actually, I should have checked first to see that that was the second disk. There it is. And there's our pool ready to go. Another smart thing to have set up here is a local FreeBSD server, an FTP server, so that as we're fetching different releases for setting up jails, it doesn't have to download them every time from the internet. You can download them from your local VM. So let's set that up now. We want to set up a directory tree in here the same way the repositories have them. I've got a tar file already with these 3 releases stored in them, so I'll just copy that in now. What was the IP address again? We actually need these directories right off the root of the FTP user's home folder. So I'll just move them. Ah. Okay. And configure the FTP server with some smart options and set it to start at boot. allowing for anonymous access read-only mode to spawn FTPD rather than using inetd, and to only listen on the loopback adapter. Nobody but this VM itself needs access to this thing. To do things really right, I should also be changing some permissions on this FTP user's home directory, but this is just for use within the one VM here, so I'm not going all out. Start it up, test it out. Was I too quick? There we go. Good. Now, onto the development tools. We need pip, and of course we need PyCharm. There's one package that I forgot, which is a recent requirement for iocage development. That one. Okay. Let's start up PyCharm and get it configured. We're going to be using virtual environments within PyCharm, which lets you keep things isolated from other projects you might be working on, and lets you customize for iocage's requirements, both in PyCharm itself, but also on the command line. This isn't the heftiest VM in the world, so it takes quite a while to start the first time. We don't want to import anything. We'll accept that. And here we just accept the defaults. Now, before we go any further, let's set up the virtual environment. And we do that by going to Configure, Settings, and Project Interpreter. And we'll add a new one. Create virtual environment. I'll call it iocage env, and we need to point it at our newly installed Python 3.6. That one. And don't inherit global site packages. Not that we really have any yet, but At this point, I'm going to grab the source code for iocage and make sure that I can get it running and have all the modules added that are needed. We won't be able to run it as root yet, but we'll be able to see if what we've done so far is working. So let's grab the source for iocage. And now we can open it. Let's just let it think for a while here, because it's going to detect some dependencies that are missing. Let's just try and run it, see what happens. It's complained about a missing module, but now, after I've opened up main.py, it's saying that there are a lot of requirements that are missing. Let's get PyCharm to install those. Look at them all. Perfect. If you don't get this up, it's going to keep complaining and complaining about missing dependencies. I ran into a situation where I tried to pip install pygit2, and it ended up downloading version 0.25, which isn't compatible with the 0.24 libgit2 that we installed earlier. So you want PyCharm to install these. This is fine. We'll install this from the command line. To do that, we need to source the virtual environment. And build it. Aha, Python is missing. We got to install that. Now we got libzfs in. Let's try this again. There we go. We'll get the usage message. Now, that's fine. This is running as an ordinary user. We expect that. But let's try, for example, to activate our pool. And to do that, I use debug configurations. So, the one we just ran, I'm going to rename this to usage because it just runs iocage and spits out how it's supposed to be used. Let's copy that and make one for activating the pool. And here we add the parameters that we would normally give the iocage command, in this case activate tank. So let's try and run that. I need root privileges, and this is where it all falls apart. We can run and debug all we want, but most of what iocage does requires root privileges, so let's fix that. If we look in the virtual environment, you can see the Python commands that are run by PyCharm. What we're going to do is create a little shell script that executes sudo python and set it up so that it doesn't require password. And in that way we can trick PyCharm into running that one instead of running Python straight out of here. And it works quite seamlessly. So we'll create a little sudo configuration file to allow running Python from that directory as root without requiring a password for my user on this host. So the format here is username and hostname to run as root with no password. And here you have to put in the whole path, you can't use a tilde. Like that. And to preserve the sourced virtual environment variables after the sudo, we need to add another line here. PyCharm does this for us every time we run or debug, but for working on the command line you're going to need that. And let's create our little script then. Call it python sudo.sh. To run Python from our virtual environment with whatever parameters we give the script. Make it executable. And there we go. A couple more tweaks that we're going to need here. Again, to do with this Python path. I'll just add that here. The location of our source tree. And to really make command line testing comfortable, let's also make a fake iocage executable that that calls our sudo python, well, that calls Python and executes main.py from within that source tree. Make it executable. Now we need to source this virtual environment again because we made a change adding that Python path. So let's do that quickly. And try it out. There we get the usage. That's nice. I'm a little wary of this, but so far so good. Let's try that. Okay. That's good. Does it work from here? Not yet, because we need to tell PyCharm to use this new Python sudo script instead of running Python. So we need to go back into settings, project interpreters, and add this. Wow, look at it all. Add local. This time add local rather than create. We want to reuse this same virtual environment, but add that guy to it. Good. Let it think a bit here. Let's try this again. Look at that. PyCharm running as an ordinary user, but executing Python as root. Perfect. At this point we could, for example, create a VM or a jail. So let's try. First, let's get the 10.3 release template. creating our datasets and downloading them very quickly from our local FTP server. While that's thinking, we can add a few more of these debug configurations. Let's just copy that one again. And add the same command that we just did. And let's create a test jail. Copy the configuration again. Actually, this is pretty fun to watch. Something that I'd like to have in future is a local web server as well for handling the updates, because as it is now, these need to be downloaded from the internet. There, we have our template now. Cool. So let's create a jail. This time we'll do it from within PyCharm. Let's run that. There's a jail. One of the really nice things about this setup is that you can go back and forth between the command line and PyCharm. Usually I'd be creating these jails on the command line rather than in PyCharm, but if I want to debug that process, I can quickly switch to that configuration and single step my way through, set breakpoints. Let's set the host name here. That needs to be run as root, no problem. Okay. Now, well, let's just start it and see what happens. Cool. Let's try a little debugging example here. Let's watch it set the IP address, which I haven't done yet. So let's give it a fixed IP that iocage should set the next time the jail starts. I don't think this takes effect until the next time I start the thing, but just for kicks, let's take a look inside, see what it's doing. Because he's still running. No IP address. Now, rather than start it up from here and see that it gets its IP, let's watch how it's actually done. And we're not using a vimage jail at this point, so we should actually be triggering there. So oh, my screen's too small. Let's add a configuration for starting this guy. So, and debug. There we go, we've stopped there. And let's single step. Look at all this good stuff. There's the address that I gave it. We can also watch the console output here. Starting the jail. You get the idea. Ta-da! Yeah. Let's try starting this all again to make sure it's still working. This is one of the caveats of using this root debugging trick in PyCharm. Sometimes it loses track of the debugger, so we'll kill it. It's probably that one. I'm just going to kill the one that I found in top. There we go. PyCharm's happy. Sometimes that happens while you're working on it, especially once you've finished debugging or aborted. So be aware of that. Let's connect up again and start it up. We'll turn off that breakpoint. Let's just start it up again. Remember, if it's a fresh login, you have to source that virtual environment for the command line versions to be able to work. He's not running. He's running. Cool. Now let's try out the nice PyTest suites that the iocage developers have made. There's a little dependency we're missing here. So we'll add that. Try again. Nice. Now, since we're not running as root, it didn't run most of the tests. So let's really test it out here. This is where having the local FTP server really shines, because every time you run this, it nukes the pool and downloads new templates. So let's see what happens. That's the problem. Let's just kill these guys. There we go. Yeah, after running the test it destroys everything, so you're running this on your development pool, not your production pool. Alright, that's it. This should be pretty much everything you need to start working on iocage, or stepping through it and debugging it and finding out how it works. In any case, it's a pretty nice environment to work in, having PyCharm being able to debug the whole way. So I hope this is helpful for those working on iocage or somebody else wanting to be able to debug as root in PyCharm.